Hey, this is Eric Westrich with Aquilius. Welcome. We're here with Talia Haller, who is a future of health thought leader and also an AI strategy consultant for life science organizations. Well, here to talk about her journey because she's one of the speakers for the upcoming uh, wearables and implantables symposium that we have going on at Aquilius. Talia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on the lineup. It seems like a really amazing event, and I think wearables and implantables is something that's on the rise. So I'm so excited that there's a whole symposia dedicated to that topic.
Well, I have to tell you that having done a lot of these, I'll be your moderator, by the way. I have yet to walk away without at least one and usually lots of amazing conversations. So we've never disappointed with our speaker lineup or even our pitch companies. It's worth paying attention to. So uh, this idea of AI and strategy how do you find strategy first and then figure that AI is an important part of that, or did you find AI and then start thinking about strategy? How did that start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, it became really apparent to me a number of years ago, I want to say around 10 years ago, before AI really came onto the scene in a major public way, um, that AI was going to have the potential to revolutionize healthcare, life sciences, the way we think about medicine. And I wanted to be part of the people driving forward how AI gets leveraged within healthcare and life science organizations. There's really a strategy to it. As you might imagine, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, we have AI, and then, we just plug it in. There's a whole process when you're talking about a new technology that's very innovative and can change a lot of things to integrating it in a way that's safe, ethical, um, mitigates risk, and then also offers a lot of the benefits that we're all looking forward to seeing. So my role is really helping companies to think about how do we leverage AI in an organization in a very strategic way.
So when did this first pop up on your radar? Can you think of one incident, something you saw, somebody you talked to that just made your jaw drop and you went, "Oh my God, this is real. This is something." When was the first time you remember being interested in strategy and AI?
Yeah, so my journey was actually quite a personal one. I actually underwent what was supposed to be a very routine surgery with like a weekend recovery time. And something went wrong within the surgery, and I ended up on bed rest for about 4 weeks. It was very uncertain, like what happened. I ended up getting an infection, and then I had to go and redo the surgery, and it ended up being kind of a long, arduous recovery process. All good now, though that was a number of years ago. And so while I was on bed rest, I could no longer work at the time. And so I had a lot of free time all of a sudden. I started reading books on the future of health, the current state of the American health system. Prior to that experience, I had been really outside of the whole healthcare life science landscape. But that experience gave me a lot of questions, right? Like how often are there missed diagnoses, malpractice, or accidents that occur in surgery? And so I started reading a lot during this time, and I read a book by Eric Topol that was all about AI and the future of medicine. And as soon as I read that book, I just thought, this is going to be the future. I really want to be part of it. And so at the time, I was a merger and acquisition strategy consultant at Deloitte. And luckily, one of the beautiful things about Deloitte is it's very easy to take charge of your career and to pivot. And so when I did eventually get back to work, I was able to actually pivot into the healthcare industry, start doing tech transformation and laying the foundation through a lot of AI strategy work for our clients.
Very good. Your partner in crime just showed up, so we'll see if we can let him in and smoothly do that. So we're going to welcome here um, Hussain
Hi, can you hear me?
Ahamed. Welcome, Hussain. We are
Yes.
recording, so anything you say will be used against you or for you either way. We've already started to talk about Talia's journey, about strategy and AI. And of course, Hussein is also one of our speakers at the Wearables and Implantables Symposium. So Hussain, how do you get started on this journey? What is Tech Ventures, Deep Tech Advisory Venture, operating, things like that? What does that have to do with somebody who is a researcher, a futurist, and a AI strategy consultant?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I got started in the consumer fitness and wellness world when wearables weren't that big of a thing. I actually started my first company before the first Apple Watch came out.
So what was
This
the first wearable you ever saw that just made you drop your jaw and say, wow, there's something here in the future?
What's the first one that made me drop my jaw?
Yeah, what were you first excited about? Where did this excitement with wearables? Did the excitement start with wearables, or did the excitement start with what are you doing and say, oh, we can use a wearable?
I think the excitement started like way back when I was a kid and I liked James Bond, frankly. And I think in one of the James Bond movies they had what was not to be known as a smartwatch back then. But essentially, he always had a trick up his sleeve, and that usually involved the watch. And so I think my fascination came there. And prior to it even being, a tool for health tracking, but of course, the early days of wearables, had it was hard to get an algorithm working that accurately tracked your steps. And today we're able to get, clinical grade measures for detecting atrial fibrillation, sleep apnea, stress, all sorts of things. And so I think that's where, you're seeing collaborations, the product focus side being a lot more science driven, right? And so that's where collaborations like, mine and Talia come about, and how we initially clicked and vibed and started, doing stuff together. So there you go.
Okay, so as you both
And that's
start,
like, this is now like 10 years into my journey. So yeah.
okay, well, as you both start your journey for this thing, at some point you must have realized you had to get a skill set you didn't have before. You had to learn something, be some, in order to become who you are today, you had to change from the person you were. And there's always some challenge in there in the way. So I'll start with Talia. Talia, what was your first big challenge where you either had to learn something, overcome something? What does that first mountain look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of this industry and the time that we joined is that it was really like just starting to surface. So a lot of the ideas have been around for a long time. Like, oh, what if we could track this? What if we could look more deeply into genetic data, and combine this with step count and like our sleep data and various biomarkers that we might be able to look at more closely in a hospital or provider setting. But a lot of this technology that we're seeing coming out now that is actually able to make tracking all of this data at relatively high levels of accuracy, sometimes even gold standard, is now becoming a reality due to, new technologies that are coming out. And so I would say as much as a challenge, it's been kind of driven by curiosity because it's such a nascent and evolving field, right? So I think something like me and Hussein really bond over a lot is actually getting the wearables on ourselves and testing them out, comparing them with each other, understanding that the data that you're looking at might not be perfect, but it's a good place to start. And then from there, you can like keep evolving it, right? So,
Can you give an insight, some insight on what that looks like? Can you give a specific example where you first had to go, oh, data, wearable together? What was a project or something you were interested or helped with?
yeah, I mean, for me, I've done a lot of personal tracking as well. I think just looking at things like, okay, we have the
What was
Aura
that?
data.
What was the
What?
first one? What was the first one you looked at?
Yeah, I mean, so I got the Aura ring and the
Okay.
Apple Watch the same month. And I also got a continuous glucose monitor. And I started looking at all of these data separately and trying to find the overlap. So what can I learn from one, but what can I learn if I start looking at takeaways from all of them? And then sometimes, like with the Apple Watch and the Aura ring, you can see that they have the same metrics. So then starting to compare metrics between the two apps and seeing, okay, which one do I think is better? Now it's becoming a reality. Like we just saw last week, the Aura and the Dexcom partnership, they'll be providing two-way streams of information where these companies are now forming partnerships to actually share data and really integrate the data coming from different wearables at a much deeper level. But a few years ago, a lot of that wasn't possible. So, one of the challenges was trying to find ways to gather insights from across the landscape of wearables, figure out which ones are the best, which ones you can trust most, and for which biometric.
So Hussein, how about you? First big project that you felt was a success or that you were proud of being a part of?
My first project? Okay. Because you asked Talia like three different questions. So I was like forming my answers for the different questions, and I have to just
Just
go back
open.
and
You can
see.
talk about anything you want. I'm just here to
No,
make.
no, 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 no. So, I mean, I guess my first project I was proud to be a part of was the very first startup that I launched, which was over 10 years ago with a group of friends and, a lot of different team members along the way that came together and were really working
So what were you able to
furiously
do with
to,
that? What were
sorry?
you able to do with that? What would you say is the change in the world you made with that? Before
Yeah,
that,
so
people couldn't do this, and now with that company, what could we do now because of you and your team?
Yeah, so we were the first to work on putting flexible electronics in soft materials, and we created a smart watch band that you could retrofit to a traditional timepiece. So what we enabled was people who had, an everyday accessory. Actually, the wristwatch is the most worn everyday accessory, I think, in the history of mankind, to become smart. And that was kind of our goal, was how can we seamlessly connect everyday things that are already a part of people's everyday lives. Frankly, because we didn't actually know what the adoption of wearables were going to be, right? It was so early that, like, people thought Fitbit was a gimmick. Apple Watch had just come out. We didn't think senior citizens would wear an Apple Watch to, track their health or to detect a fall. And so we thought, why can't we make any watch smart? And so that's what we, worked to build a product to do. And I think looking back, we were a little bit early, but certainly
Mhm.
we caught the attention of a lot of folks in the wearables and watch space. That's when I ended up transitioning to another wearable startup in the Bay Area that was building a really cool smartwatch, the first that never needed charging. And then later ended up working at Aura, and then today I've set up my own firm that advises different companies in this space. So I think that's it all started there with an idea, I remember my co-founder and I looking at talking about, the first smartwatches that had come out. It was Fitbit, Pebble. Pebble was like one of the first crowdfunding campaigns as well that, caught a lot of attention. One of the first like successful Kickstarters. And I think we were at an event where my co-founder was looking at a nice watch. Some engineer was wearing a Rolex and he was daydreaming, and the guy said, "Hey, this one isn't smart. It's not a Pebble." And he said, "Well, actually, why not?" And that's how the journey began. So yeah, it was a little rambly.
So
And
Talia,
real quick, what I love about me and Hussein working together is Hussein has done a lot more on like the hardware, the engineering, like the actual product side of things. And I've done a lot more on like the pure data side of things. So one of the projects that I'm really excited about that I'm working on now is the NIH All of Us program and helping them develop an AI strategy. So now that we have wearables on so many different people and whatnot, and we have electronic health records that are capturing a lot of the phenotype and the clinical data for people, actually being able to merge that in really big population level databases, which is what the NIH All of Us program is doing, and then leveraging AI to generate insights from that can then drive forward the whole field of precision medicine. And so that's kind of, I play a little bit downstream of the hardware itself, more on like, hey, what can we do with that data? And the reason AI is so important is because we're starting to generate so much data that it's just impossible to look at it all on a human level and to really capture meaningful insights. And having AI gives us a way to monitor, interpret, and use all that data to optimize not just an individual's health, but also extrapolate those insights out to a population level.
In
so
summary, what
Hussein,
she's saying is that I jump off a cliff and call her to help me assemble the airplane on the way down.
what did you think of Talia the first time you met her?
Oh, this I was not expecting that question. Um, I thought that she was building a competitive product to something that we were working on in our venture studio, because of like the first three sentences that came out of her mouth were probably the first three sentences that would have come out of my mouth if I had spoken first. So so I knew right away that, you know, we had very similar vision for the space. And I was actually going to give you the same my answer to the question you asked her about how she knew, like, for the first time you needed to bring these different data streams together. So in my case, it actually came from um, two, three different anecdotes. One was working with a eating disorder clinic last year, a virtual care company that helps patients that have anorexia, bulimia, and you know, various different eating disorders, where they have their set of clinicians provide basically devices to track blood pressure, you know, weight, temperature for their patients, and they wanted to start being able to get more continuous data flows and actually, you know, integrate wearables into a remote patient monitoring program. That was one anecdote. The other one was a fund out of the UK, by a friend of mine called Hussain, called Hussain Ventures, that backed a weight loss app that actually provides users with a CGM, and a wearable device, you know, and a weighing scale to coach them around their how to lose weight, and that have shown superior outcomes than, you know, many of the GLP-1s and, you know, Weight Watchers or Nooms of the world. Um, Shaquille O'Neal is also a minority investor in that company. So that's kind of the first time I came across something that was integrating, you know, a CGM and a wearable. And then I guess the last one is through a current advisory role with a company called Ultrahuman, which was one of the first company to actually have a multi-data stream ecosystem with a CGM and a smart ring, you know, which now, you know, Aura might have as well in the new year, given their partnership with Dexcom. We'll have to see how that plays out.
So just because we aren't all as smart as you, I know I gotta appeal to the wide audience that we're gonna hit. Could you explain what a CGM is?
Go for it, Talia.
Yeah, so that's a continuous glucose monitor. The current versions will go right in your arm. There's a little needle that goes in and typically will measure interstitial glucose levels and or interstitial fluid, and there's a proxy analyte that can be used as a proxy for glucose. So it can tell you in real time, track your glucose curve, and that can tell you how you're responding to different foods. This can be really good to assess your metabolic health and understand like what foods are generating a bigger response for you specifically. So it's a really personalized way to look at metabolic health.
Yeah.
So then, rather than getting because it's always been a pain to do that. So by the way, GCMs were one of my case studies for my doctorate degree, so that's in there. But you know, it used to be such a pain. You'd take these dots throughout the day, and it was like, okay, I kind of have an idea, but you don't have, hey, I just ate a sandwich, I just worked out, which now with that continuous monitoring did. And the problem has been it's always such a hassle to go ahead and take a sample. And now that you have this continuous, you could actually compare it with life.
Yeah. And what's exciting is actually this year was the first year that these products, the CGMs, have actually got approved by the FDA to get sold over the counter, just this past summer. So there was you know, this was traditionally a product meant only for type 1 diabetics and people with diabetes. And, you know, they've been hugely successful, and most people have replaced, I don't know if it's most people, but certainly a large group of people have replaced, you know, taking that finger prick with a lancet, um, with a continuous glucose monitor, through their insurance plan, through their doctor. And, you know, the largest company in the space is likely Abbott. They've made like, I think, 5.7 billion last year just selling, you know, their Libre, Freestyle Libre. And then, you know, Dexcom has also done super well. So those are probably the biggest players. But companies started commercializing these for nutrition coaching to non-diabetics as a wellness product for metabolic health, like Talia mentioned. Except, you know, it still required a doctor to prescribe it. So when you would go and buy it through the website, you know, there was some kind of you'd have to fill out a form, and a doctor would need to, you know, do something in the back end that would allow you to get one. Versus in Europe and Asia, it's been, you know, approved to be sold. Any local pharmacy, anybody can sort of buy them. And so for the first time, both Abbott and Dexcom actually got approved to sell CGMs over the counter just this past summer. So that should be really exciting, and we should see a larger adoption for the broader market, like, in the coming months and year for sure.
So Talia, on your journey to co-partners in the CM, obviously, Hussein looked at you and said, wow, here's somebody on the same page, kind of a partner in thought here, but also a competitor. How did you move from that initial experience to actually working together?
Yeah, well, I want to give a shout out to LinkedIn for connecting us, um, which is actually cool. I've met some of my best friends through LinkedIn recently, and I think it's due to, giving us a platform for people who share interests to be able to connect. Now, I know what Hussein thought, maybe a competitor. I did not see it that way. I thought, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. He is, you know, there's a lot of people that, talk a lot, don't do a lot. Hussein, I saw being one of those people who actually does a lot and like really knows his stuff. He's really deep into wearables. Um, Actually, one of the first times of us hanging out and getting to know each other was me going over to his apartment and looking at all of the different wearables he had and us discussing pros and cons, trying them on, looking at the various biomarkers that they could tell us about. So I saw in him like a very kindred spirit who was down to get nerdy on wearables in a sense. So yeah, so my first impression was really just excitement around meeting someone who shared a similar passion.
Yeah, then I found somebody who could test all the products that I had sitting in boxes in my apartment, that all my friends would make fun of, saying, there's more stuff here than the local Best Buy, and you got to start throwing it out. And I was like, oh, and Talia was like, oh, I'll try it. I'll try all these CGMs on all these different wearables. So that's kind of how we got along. And we started hanging out at more conferences together. And then eventually Talia invited me to be a co-presenter at a conference that she was going to be a speaker at in Boston earlier this year called Med Device. And that's actually, how the topic of our presentation was born, which is the future of, healthcare, and how wearables and biosensors are going to enable monitoring and diagnostics, and what we're also excited to share with the Aquilius community earlier next month.
Yeah. And
So,
Eric,
so
one thing I wanted to add was, you know, it's one thing to look at a wearable or continuous glucose monitor as an example and say, oh, it can do this, this, this. But the practicality of the wearable sometimes is it might not live up to expectations, or it might exceed expectations. So Hussein has given me a lot of wearables to test out, and I love running my own experiments to assess the wearable for myself. So we've done that with a couple of different products, including CGM and how that works with the Ultra Human app. And I like to devise like very specific experiments, like meal plan over a certain number of days and see, okay, how's it tracking? And also to learn about my own health and be able to share those takeaways and those ideas for experiments that people do. Because one of the big trends, I think, in wearables, is okay, it might be cool. You get it for a week. Okay, look, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this. But then how do I make this really useful and actionable and help use it to improve my health over the long run? And a lot of that comes down to actually doing like so-called little experiments, right? So, okay, if I eat this at this time, what's the curve look like? If I switch it out with a different meal, does that improve it? And so we've done a lot of that experiments and sharing ideas too.
yeah, and I used to work for the world leading geographic information systems company. So we used to put all these things in an actual track place because, it's like what you've been exposed to where. So if you're in the desert or if you're at the beach or you're in the mountains. And so we would get people for sometime months or even a year agree to let us track them and monitor them. So it really has a lot of wide of, if you're on an airplane, okay, does that make a difference?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun.
and you're going to
fun
see it. No, go
no,
ahead, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say it's fun to see my slight fear of airplanes just really show up in the wearables data when my heart rate's at like 130 during takeoff. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
crazy what the mind can do because I'm just sitting here and nothing's changing, but my heart is like
Well,
pumping.
And
well,
one
they're
thing you're going to see next year is actually coaching people around their jet lag. So there's actually a way with some of the wearables to track to determine a user's body clock and give them a deep circadian insights. And they do that usually using a temper. We will explain this in our talk a little bit more. But once you determine somebody's body clock, you can coach them around, when's a good time to drink caffeine throughout the day so that it doesn't affect your sleep or get bright light exposure or whatnot. And so similarly around jet lag, you know, you can basically, keep track of the shift in the time zone, using the user's phone, but then you still know what their body clock was, and the body clock hasn't adjusted yet. So you can see, how long it takes the body to adjust or coach the user in order to, get over jet lag,
Well,
thanks to a
that'd be
wearable.
really helpful when I was doing lots of shift work, changing
Oh,
constantly.
yeah, shift workers is another thing. In fact, that already exists. There's already a shift work mode on the Ultra Human Ring app. I don't know if Aura has it. Maybe. Yeah.
So, Talia, I'm guessing best based on your response to airplanes, you will not be personally testing any of the wearables and implantables that they're putting on astronauts now. I'm taking it
Um,
not be
it would
your.
have to be pretty safe. I've been doing a lot of
Talia never
research
says
in
no to
space.
testing a wearable. That's fine.
Yes. Yeah, you never know. You never know exactly. But there's been a lot of really cool research in space omics, which is like all of the wearables and then the omics data, so genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics in space flight, just because right now we're a single planet species, but there's goals to become a multiplanetary species. And so that's actually a future trend that I see taking off is like a lot more um, research, insight, and understanding into how does space affect all of the different biomarker data and how do we prepare for, eventually maybe going out into space and traveling further than we currently do.
How do you feel about doing some submarine testing the other way?
Hmm. Um, if it's safe, I like to look at the data. I mean, I don't love flying, but I still do it because the
Oh,
data's there telling me it's safe to do, even though my
I'll
mind
go
doesn't
down in a
like it.
submarine. I'll go down in a submarine, no problem.
Oh, very good. Talia, what are you most excited about right now? If there's one thing that's going on in your life or in research in general, what are you most excited about right now?
Well, on brand, I'm really excited to see all of the data start coming together to get like much deeper insights. So one of the things that my team, like me and some researchers at Johns Hopkins are looking into is actually layering in genetic data into the wearables and the integrated EHR data. So then layering genetic data into that and seeing what comes out in genome-wide association studies. So I just think it's very exciting that for the first time, I think we have really strong foundational data that we can actually get to some of the deeper insights and understanding the biological pathways. And then I think there's a lot that we're going to be able to do with that to help people optimize their health, but I still think it's a little unclear, like exactly how that will shake out in the next few years.
So, Hussein, as we talk here in tech space and innovation space, we're all excited about all this stuff because it's very cool. But the outside world sees it when they have some major impact in their life, like they save money, they save their health. If we were to get kind of specific, what do you think is the next big impact that's going to allow the rest of the world, the consumers, to go, oh my God, this is good?
Yeah, this is a good question.
When you think about impact things, not cool and data, it's all, but what do you think is a one big impact that's going to be coming out in the next 1 to 3 years that's just going to make people relate to wearables or implantables as
Yeah.
something that's really important to them
So
personally?
actually, my answer isn't going to be a product related answer. It's actually going to be an accessibility one, which is insurance coverage. And so that's something we're going to talk about, more probably or mention a little bit more in our talk in early December. But once, your doctor is able to recommend you something that gets covered through your insurance plan, so you can get, an Apple Watch or a smart ring or whatever it might be, free of charge, and start getting advice and then tie it into, the kind of care that you're getting from your physician, that's when I think you're really going to see an impact. And in fact, to answer your previous question, what I'm most excited about in the year to come is partnering, with folks like Talia and researchers to, enable clinicians and private practices to basically track and provide, hyper-personalized care, now using the data that we're getting from these different data streams. And that's whether it's the devices that are tracking them, their blood work, their conditions that are already, in their electronic health record. You can now actually, everybody can now share, it's not very used, but people can start sharing their data with their doctor from the Apple Health app. Not all, hospitals or health providers will accept it, but there's a certain initial set that's starting to enable that. You can also import your electronic health record into the Apple Health app and start looking at it. But it's not really come together in a way that it's going to get adopted, right? Apple is building a, consumer electronic company. Your insurance and health provider is trying to, provide as much care to as many people as possible while not, getting overburdened in terms of their cost of care. So that's that gap in between the two. What I believe requires is partnering with researchers, with partnering with, folks like Talia and the teams that she's worked with to go condition by condition, with specific partners that we've identified and create the best experience for consumers. And then ultimately it is something that's going to get, a large adoption in the broader population.
Even what I'm starting to see already for real implemented is even with your personal trainer at the gym. If you
Yeah.
disclose that information, they can tell what you eat, how you're doing, when you're exercising, how much of each, whatever you did.
Yeah. No,
Pretty,
we have a few slides. We have a slide talking about moving from the, what is it, reactive to proactive patient model, and then just the personalized, like, approach of really tailoring care to an individual and their specific condition, their specific biomarkers, because everyone is ultimately different. And the way the US healthcare system has been created and, treatment has been provided up to now has not been in a hyper-personalized manner from our point of view.
Talia, what is your biggest personal challenge right now?
Personal challenge.
Thing that's most challenging to you that you're saying like, "Ah, I'm not quite sure how to do this. I don't quite know how we're gonna deliver this, do this, measure this, convince people this."
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't get asked that a lot. I think for me, so recently I gave a talk on future of diagnostics. There's two things I tend to cover: future of wearables, future of diagnostics. And the future of diagnostics talk is a lot more out there. The ones we give on future of wearables is a lot more of like, this is what's in development. This is where we'll be going next 1, 3, 5, 10 years. The future of diagnostics chat or session is a lot more of like, hey, this is, where we could technically go in 10 to 20 years with the right incentives, maybe even a little bit longer. And so I gave this talk last week and I asked the audience, like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And someone said, I think this is unrealistic. And I don't think they were wrong to think it because it is a future of health vision that would take a lot of moving around and certainly some paradigm shifts to move towards that. But I do think, with the technology that we have right now, we are in a position where technologically we can achieve a lot more seamlessness and a lot better care outcomes in the entire system, but there need to be some systemic changes. So that's a big challenge to me to think about, okay, how do we make this so that it seems more realistic and we could actually get there? I think we're all aware of, the political, the systemic, the societal challenges that, we have a very built out system and there's a lot of inefficiencies in it and things that could be better but aren't. And how do we move towards a much more seamless system that gets rid of a lot of things that maybe don't need to be there, that are slowing things down, complicating it, And I see my role in society as being kind of a voice for, a vision of the future of health, even if it's a little bit unrealistic to try to get people thinking outside of just the current system that we sit in. And so I think that's a really big challenge for me, is thinking, how to make this seem manageable and bring a lot of people into the folds of where we could eventually go to, because people have to see it to start moving that direction.
Well, there's a big challenge is always getting people to think or behave differently. And that always takes changes on many levels. So many years after something becomes, oh, of course, it takes a lot longer to roll that into products and people's lives and their behaviors. So we always have to work on the change, predict the change in technology, but then we have to take the change in adoption.
Yes, 100%. And something that I've learned is sometimes people can't, envision themselves doing something differently until they've actually had the opportunity to use something new, right? So, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, before large language models hit the scene in late 2022, people couldn't have imagined an AI large language model being part of their everyday flow, or even saying something along the lines of, I can't even imagine like having to write, or create a document before this. Now we have people saying this, right? 5 years ago, they couldn't even have imagined this. So we're moving into this world where there's a lot of things that I think people can't even imagine today. And so it's very hard for them to respond to like what they would do in the future in an accurate way. And that's something that I try to take into account when I'm coming up with my future of health vision. Like, maybe today you can't imagine AI being the first step when something is wrong in a medical capacity, but 10 years down the line, that could be the reality. And maybe people are very comfortable with that. There was a time when we didn't think there was a lot of controversy over anesthesia and other things that now are super commonplace and accepted. So it's that curve of adoption.
Well, part of your big contribution as a future of health thought leader is trying to get people to move from the familiar to the unfamiliar, which is making the unfamiliar seem familiar enough at a level where they'll take that step, that next step, which gets them there. I always joke that like electric cars could be way different if you design them from the ground up to be an electric car, but they look exactly like a regular car because getting people to adopt electric car, if the controls were there and the screens were different and oh, what's this? But oh yeah, it's just like your regular car, except when you put the nozzle in there, electricity comes out. But
Yeah.
don't worry about the technology.
And to stay on the theme of adoption, the other thing to consider is the level of invasiveness of the technology, right? Because the less invasive and the more seamless it becomes, the greater you're going to be able to drive adoption. So, we've talked about, CGMs that require still today to have a small needle, right, to measure interstitial fluid to actually give you glucose. There's a few folks working on, technologies that are far less invasive than that, from whether it's microneedles to potentially sweat to potentially only using an optical solution to determine, an analyte at a certain level. Similarly, Talia, mentioned anesthesia. There's now non-invasive ways to stimulate brain waves to induce a state of sedation with less anesthetic product, right? So as the technology gets, progresses, it'll get less invasive. It will get adopted more. And then the last piece, I think, is for it to be completely seamless. And that's why I said from the beginning of the call that I think, the first startup that I ever worked on was maybe a little bit early, because we were trying to conceal the technology, right, in a traditional watch band that you could fit to any timepiece. And I remember even in our very first fundraising, newsletter that we sent out before we raised our first round of capital, we had a little module that fitted, that was in the buckle, concealed in the buckle off the strap, that was supposed to measure your glucose, and it was showcased there, and this is like, I'm talking 10 years ago. All
I
right. So
see why you guys work well together because adoption is based on two things, getting people to think differently, getting comfortable thinking differently. And the other one is what you talked about, making the ease of adoption because if you have to behave differently, it's much harder. So if you can integrate that smoothly, which doesn't require, which minimizes the change in behavior they have to do. So I kind of think it's interesting who's saying that you're busy minimizing behavior changes by making it seamless, and Talia is busy trying to work on making it more comfortable, that to make that thing that seems differently doesn't seem so differently, so it's comfortable in adoption. So it's
Yeah.
a good adoption
Well,
talk.
and my ultimate vision for the health, I think we're actually in the awkward space right now where it's like,
Yes.
so here's, where we had like no health data on an individual, and now we're in this phase where we're going up, and this is like the level of effort someone has to put in. So we're at this phase where like, okay, if you put in some effort, you can get your wearables, you can look at the data, you can get some actions out of this. But then I think it'll go down to where it's like, hey, now once you've gotten, your wearables, you just let those monitor in the background. You don't have to do a lot. We're trying to make it easier. But we're kind of in the awkward spot where we're all learning what's important right now. But I see a future of health world where, AI sits and it monitors, you just have your wearables and you go about your life, and you actually have less to worry about, less to think about, but you're healthier. And that's the future vision that I want to bring people to, because I think at the end of the day, most people want to worry about other things, not their health all the time and tracking those metrics, but they do want their health to be the best it can be.
Well, if all we have to do is buy a ring or a watch or a set of glasses, then, and that's all we have to do, that's not so different. We can probably handle that as consumers pretty well.
I think it's a good start. Yeah, I think ultimately, there has to be some in order to create true stickiness, there might have to be more incentives given in why, it's useful to use such products. And there's a few companies out there looking at rewards mechanisms for amount of steps you do, amount of times you have a elevated heart rate activity minutes per week, which is there's a WHO CDC guideline for that actually now, which is 150 minutes of elevated heart rate activity per week. There's everyone knows about Pokemon, right? And you know how Pokemon Go became a craze. Well, actually, Pokemon launched an app called Pokemon Sleep that allowed users to earn rewards on how they were sleeping. And there's this whole experience of how your Pokemon goes through this journey. It's people laugh, but they pulled in 100 million last year, just Pokemon Sleep alone, in in-app purchases and gamifying the experience. And now just this year, I think a couple months ago, they announced, that the data from your wearable will be integrated into the experience around sleeping. So prior to that, it was just, using your phone on your
Well,
bedside table.
Talia brought up a good point, because when we started an Internet of Things company, at that time it was all about looking at information as moving boulders. Here's this big video. Here's this. How do we move these boulders? And then we started putting these smart devices in hotels with 600 rooms and things like that. And then it was no longer dealing with boulders. It was dealing with a sandstorm, all this little data hitting like crazy. How do you make sense of it and do it? So the age of the data is here. Um, Talia, probably my most important question for you is, if somebody wants to learn more about you and what you do, where is the absolute best place for them to go?
Yeah, right now it's on LinkedIn. I do publish a lot of updates, talks that I'll be giving, thoughts on latest research and wearable experiments, as well as key takeaways from conferences that I go to. So always love connecting with people and having conversations around this topic.
And of course, they'll be able to see this talk and others, your talk, on our Quilius LinkedIn channel and Instagram also, and our YouTube. Hussein, same thing for you. If somebody wants to learn more about you and what you do, where's the absolute best place for them to go?
No, yeah, my best place is also on Talia's LinkedIn. Um, no, jokes. I mean, jokes aside, I'm definitely less active on LinkedIn, trying to be more active. It's a little bit difficult to keep up with everything. There is a website. We do have a website. It's not very built out, but you can contact us through it, or there's the contact information listed, hutech.ventures. So if you're you know, whether you're a founder or the strategic venture arm of a corporate group that's in the health tracking and diagnostic space, or a family office, you know, feel free to reach out. That's probably a better way to reach out through the website, to the email listed on our website, than via LinkedIn.
And of course, Hutech is spelled Huteck. So it's Hutech.
CH.
Sorry, CH.
I should have said that.
H Ventures.
Yeah.
HutechVentures.com.
Hutech.ventures. Yeah. No, Hutech.ventures.
Oh, Hutech. So glad to get that right. Hutech, HUTECH.ventures.
That's right.
Guys, thank you for much, both of you, for being here. I look forward to hearing your talk, which will have much more detail about wearables and implantables in the future. You'll see it at the Wearables and Implantable Symposium. You can attend that in person, which I like because you get the talks, you get the pitches, whether you're in person or virtual, but you don't get the eating, drinking, and networking, which is the really cool part of that. So recommend everyone come. And everybody, thanks for being here again. And everybody, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Eric. This was great.